Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. I'm Mona Duncan, your moderator. And do you ever wonder why you do the things you do? Well, this program is for you. This is our gift to you from the William Glasser Institute for Choice Theory. And our motto is to facilitate a world where people make responsible choices and build healthy relationships. And each week we have a staff member, a certified member, tell us about some concept that they use and how it is working so effectively in their life, and share it with you so you can learn more about it. Our speaker today is Jeff Steedman, and he is from Australia. And our topic today is on lead management in a power station setting. So looking forward to this. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Mona. I'm pleased to be back again.
So whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm going to talk today about, it's sort of a follow-up, I should say. For those who did hear, I talked about the 4 hats of lead management. And this is a follow-up about a real-life situation where I've really taken choice theory, reality therapy, and lead management into a power station setting. So where I need to give a little bit of background, just to inform people, and some of the indigenous material that I talked about previously will pop in too. So the place I'm talking about is called Loy Yang Power Station. Now, it's midway between where I live, a small country town called Bairnsdale, which is about 300 kilometres from Melbourne, which is the capital city of Victoria in Australia. Loy Yang B is midway between Bairnsdale and Melbourne, so it's about 150 kilometres away from where I am. Now, when we live in the country, Australia is a very big place. It's not unusual to drive 150 or 200 kilometres to do a job in a day. And for some people, that might seem really strange, but you know, it's just what we do. It's how we live. So the place where Loy Yang is set up is in a city called Traralgon. It's a very small city. And Traralgon, a funny name, it's spelled Traralgon, Traralgon. Quite difficult to trip off the tongue, but it's actually an indigenous name. It means running water in the Gunai-Kurnai language, and the Gunai-Kurnai are the local custodians and original inhabitants of the area. So Loy Yang B power station has a generating capacity of about 1,200 megawatts and is a brown coal open cut mine. So it's a big power station. In fact, it's the 3rd largest power station in Victoria. Now, brown coal is a low-grade coal. We have black coal, which is high grade, and basically what that means is that it burns much hotter, it's much drier, and has less emissions, so it's better for the environment. Brown coal, here we say it's a dirty coal. It's the dirtiest form of fuel, the most emits the most emissions. But it does supply 20% of Victoria's electricity requirements, so it's a very important part of our grid, our electricity grid. It was originally established in 1993, that's when it was completed, and it's been refurbished on a regular basis. To give you an idea of the size of it and the sorts of importance of it to the economy, if we were to build it today, it's estimated that it would cost about $3 billion, that's in Australian dollars, to build, and it would take about 8 years to build it. So it's a massive infrastructure. Originally, it was built by a group called SEC Victoria. That stands for State Electricity Commission. And the State Electricity Commission was a government-owned and run enterprise, and it looked after all of our power needs. But it was privatised in 1995, so shortly after Loy Yang was completed. it was privatized. And what that means is it was sold off. The whole of our electricity system was sold off to private companies from anywhere around the world. Some of us still find that strange, to sell off an infrastructure that's so important to countries from around the world. I doubt that would happen in the US. I think it probably wouldn't be allowed, and probably many other countries around the world as well. Nevertheless, that's what happened here. So Loy Yang is also an indigenous name. Loy Yang is the Gunai Kurnai people's name for large or big eel. So there were many huge, they called them conger eels, huge conger, freshwater conger eels in the area. And they named the power station after the eels. I don't know why, but perhaps they just like the name. But there is a strong link back to the Gunai Kurnai peoples in the area. So Loy Yang is currently owned by Alinta Energy. And this gives you an idea of the, I guess, the ownership structure. Alinta Energy is a huge company. It's a Hong Kong-based Chinese company, and it's actually owned by the Chow Tai Fook Enterprises. And again, I suspect I would find that in the US it would be unimaginable to have an important infrastructure like a power station owned by the Chinese. However, that is the case here. That's what our regulators have allowed. Since its privatization in 1995, Loy Yang has been owned by initially an American company, then a British company, then a French company, a German company, a Japanese company, and now a Chinese company. Most of them had partnerships with Australian companies at the same time, or Australian branches. So the Chow Tai Fook Enterprises Australian branch is called Alinta Energy, who owns it. Why I tell you that is because it leads to a change each time a new ownership comes in. And that's a particular change that comes with ethnicities. It's interesting that different countries have quite unique and distinctive styles in the way that they look at managing, leading, and running a business. And that's led to real challenges for the people at the coalface, if you'll pardon the pun, at Loy Yang Power Station. Because each time a new company has taken over with a completely different cultural background, they've demanded that the systems that are in place fit with the way they operate. And that's led to huge turmoil and stress, potentially, within the company at Loy Yang, or the operation at Loy Yang. So basically, the people who are at Loy Yang have remained through that, and some of them, many of them, are still there from back in 1995, when it was owned by the SEC, State Electricity Commission. The State Electricity Commission was as I said, a government-run industry, and it was a heavily unionized workforce. A lot of these companies come from countries where unions are either not strong or don't operate at all. So, for example, the Chinese, they don't have unionized workforces at all. So for them, it was a cultural challenge to try and understand the way that the Australian workplace functioned. For us, we're used to it. We just, management and unions negotiate on a day-to-day basis. It's not a problem. It's done in a spirit of generally goodwill. Some, obviously you have disagreements, but generally they come to a place where they get on with it and they give a high quality product. So when I was first asked to go to Loy Yang, it was around 2005. So we're talking, what's that, about 17 years ago. And it was initially because a couple of team leaders were struggling in their relationship. Now, to give you an idea of how it operates, the company has divided itself up into two essential areas. There are others, but two essential areas. One's called operations and maintenance, and the other is called shift supervisors. So the operations and maintenance look after, the name would indicate, all of the mechanical and electrical works required to keep the station operating. The shift supervisors look after the day-to-day actual operations, making sure the power goes out through those lines to the people of Victoria. The thing that struck me when I first arrived at Loy Yang Power Station, which was about 10 years after the SEC had sold it, was that there was a very strong sense of community service within the people who worked there. They, above and beyond any pay they got for their job, they were proud of keeping the lights on in Victoria. And it was a universal. And it still is. I didn't at any stage ever meet anyone who wanted to do anything other than give 100% in service, which was a really interesting culture, because from outside you might not think that was the case. But once you got inside and you really rubbed shoulders with the people who worked there, you realized that they had a real pride in the delivering of a quality, ongoing, reliable service at a good price to the people of Victoria. So the invitation to come in was because two team leaders were struggling with their relationship, and those team leaders were operations and maintenance. And that meant that their teams were not working effectively together. As it was described to me at the time by the HR management who asked me to come in, they're operating in what we call silos. You might use the same term there as well. So basically silos, each works individually. There's very little communication between them and minimal cooperation as well, just whatever needs to be. Now that doesn't lead to a high quality outcome. So they were at a loss as to how they might be able to resolve that. When I came in, my very first thing was to listen, try and find out and understand the culture. And what I learned was that coming from the government-run background, it was at that stage a heavily boss-managed environment. Lead management wasn't understood, it wasn't used, it wasn't a part of the way they operated at all. And I want to share with you a story of the culture that was there, and it's forever gone down in the annals of history of Loy Yang B as the minibar episode. Now, minibars in Australia, I think you probably have something similar. Bars that are little fridges and in hotel rooms or motel rooms that are stocked with small bottles of alcohol. When people from the power station went away to training, all of their costs were covered, including the cost of the minibar. And that had never been a problem. But in one instance, and it was before I went there, so before 2005, two people who'd gone away at a training had overindulged in the minibar and run up a huge bill. Management's response to that, being boss managers, was to say, right, we'll fix this. No more minibar. Now, what they didn't take into account was that hundreds of other workers had been away for training and never abused the minibar. So in order to control the two people who'd done the wrong thing, they punished every single member of the workplace. Here we are in 2021, and they're still talking about the minibar. Most of the people who are here now weren't there then. So you can see the damage that boss management can do and inflict on a culture. Now that's emblematic. There are lots of other things. But what that meant is that each of the team leaders were also operating under boss management. And each were using external control psychology, each trying to control the other to be predominant in their work. But I was able to tap into what sat underneath that, which was that pride in service. And the way I was able to get across to the leaders was to help them to understand their power need. Again, pardon the pun, we were talking about the power industry, but power need in terms of lead management and choice theory, to do the best they could, to be seen to be the best, was more important than any rivalry that they might have. So I figured the best way to go about doing this was to teach them some choice theory. So that's where I started. I taught them some choice theory, just the two leaders. We got them together and I taught them about the 5 needs that drive all human behavior. And they could then see that their power needs were, in fact, what was causing the problem, that they both wanted the same thing, but they were using external control, trying to control each other to try and achieve that, and that really wasn't getting a good result. Well, I can tell you that their eyes got wider each time I explained something, and you could see them gradually saying, wow, why didn't we know about this earlier? None of our other training has ever told us this. We never learned any of this. After teaching them about the needs, they said, well, how do we do this? How do we do this with our teams? How do we get a better result? So we moved on to teaching them lead management, how to use a non-punitive, non-coercive approach, which recognized the needs profile of each of the employees in their teams. So what they did was they sat down with their teams and they actually developed needs profiles with them so that they understood every single member of their team and their teams understood them. And they were able to then say, let's make sure that what we do is needs satisfying for you, needs satisfying for me as a leader. And of course, we know lead managers have an agenda, that met the agenda of the business, which is to have a successful business that pumped out the most reliable, best value electricity in Victoria. Well, it just took off like a brush fire. These guys went back and they were jumping out of their skins. They couldn't believe how good this was. And they told the other team leaders. Next thing I know, HR's ringing me and saying, we don't know what you're doing, but, and we don't understand it because clearly they come from boss management, but whatever it is, we want more of it. So can you help us out? Can you meet with and train and support all of the team leaders? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. That would be a great thing to do. So it went from just 2 team leaders to the 5 team leaders. And for, I think it was about 5 years, I supported all of the team leaders in developing on monthly support, in developing their lead management skills, teaching them choice theory. They all went through a basic intensive training. So for those who are not that aware of choice theory, it's a very intense 4-day, here in Australia anyway, 4-day training, which requires them really to do some huge growth and self-evaluation. But it's the best thing you could ever go through. So if there's anyone listening who's never done a basic intensive, jump onto your nearest Choice Theory Institute and get onto it, because it'll be the best training you've ever done. These guys loved it. And I knew I was on a winner. When working with them, they said, you know, we could use this at home too, couldn't we? And I thought, yes, these guys have got it. This isn't about doing something to their employees. This is about how you are as a person. And once you get to that point, then you know that you've really embedded something that's of worth. So the lead management then just bloomed. They asked me to come and work with their teams. I did that. But more importantly, what I tried to do was to teach the team leaders what I knew so that they could do it on a day-to-day basis with their teams and continue to support and teach their teams regularly rather than just every now and again. In 2010, the program stopped for a short period of time. And it stopped because they had a new plant manager who was the most extreme boss manager I think I've ever met in my life. He did not want a bar of this namby-pamby, soft, spoil them, choice theory, lead management stuff. It was get in there and tell them what to do. So for 2 years, he drove that. Their production went down, their quality went down, their sick days went up, their injuries went up, the faults went up, maintenance costs more. Now, remember, we're talking about a business that to establish now would cost about $3 billion. So when something went wrong, it wasn't a $100 fix. It may be $1 million fix. It took him 2 years, but eventually he said, we need you back. So I came back. He went. He was gone. His figures, it performed so disastrously in that time, so markedly different to how well it was running under lead management that he ended up, I think it was just after I returned, but it was too late to turn around. The damage had been done. So another new manager came in and he was very interested. And we then grew the training from not just the team leaders, but the shift supervisors. So we had the 5 team leaders, operations and maintenance, and now the 6 shift supervisors also did the training. And then we went on and trained the people in HR. We went on and trained, and all these people did basic intensives, and some went on and did the next level as well. So they were becoming really familiar and the environment was becoming a really structured one. Now, during this whole period, we had the change from American to British to French, Japanese to French, and finally to Australian ownership. Not Australian. There were Australian ownership through all those, but the last one is the current owners, which are Chinese. And that meant all those cultural changes were occurring, but the lead management that these guys took on meant that they were able to surf that wave. They were able to recognize that, yes, there are things that we can't control, but we can control what we do day to day. We can control how we relate to each other. We can choose how we operate as a team. And yes, the paperwork changes, but in essence, it doesn't have to change what we do at all. Lead management became the catalyst and the underpinning of them continuing to produce, no matter who the owners were, the highest quality outcomes. And that was exciting to see and fun. I loved it. I loved working with it. So I guess what I want to say is that if you can take a bunch of what we call in Australia, blokey blokes. I mean, these were guys that had grown up in a government business that really was hands-on. They became leaders off the tools. They weren't trained in any sort of leadership at all, really, but they embraced lead management with a gusto. They loved it. And they also then realized it was about them changing how they operated, getting rid of the punitive, coercive approaches that they'd grown up learning in that blokey environment, and saying, we can do this differently and we can do this well. And the results were there, the figures were there. It was all very much showing that it was working the way it should. Now, have dropped off in the last 18 months due to COVID, so I haven't been going there, but just recently I've been asked to go back to do some work with some of the people there, and I'm anticipating it'll be similar to what's happened in the past, that gradually I'll go back to supporting them on a regular basis. And that's something I really enjoy, because when you're part of an environment where people understand and use choice theory and lead management, you're going to have the most fun you'll have anywhere. And there is no doubt about that at all. The last thing I want to say is that they developed over the period that I was there, and this is something they developed themselves, a document that they called the Loyang B style. And not by coincidence, it incorporated the connecting habits and was almost entirely the connecting habits, but written in a style that suited the Loyang power station. And that Loyang style is still there. It's interesting because I don't think it's got anything to do with slippery eels, which is what the Loyang name means, but it is everything to do with choice theory and connecting habits. So if lead management can work in an environment like that, can take it from as boss management as you could possibly imagine, where punitive and coercive approaches were the norm, and people can grasp that and love it and shift that environment around. And if it can survive through all of those ownership changes and completely different cultures coming in, I think it bodes well for how effective and how worthwhile it is in any work environment. There are lots of other environments that I've worked in, some which seem to lend themselves more readily. Education comes to mind. The health industry also comes to mind. I've done a lot of work at Latrobe Regional Hospital, which has about, I think, 2,500 employee base, and again training all their leaders in lead management. They adapt more readily, but when you come from an industry that traditionally is male oriented, blokey, uses boss management and thinks that's the way that you operate, and you can see the change, that's when you get the biggest buzz. So that's my journey with Loyang Power Station, and it's one that's continuing. I don't know where it'll end up. I hope I could say in another 10 years' time I'm still involved with them. I suspect I will. So thanks very much, Mona. I don't know if you might have a few questions there.
Well, you showed us in a really easy way to follow. I saw that you were talking about, there was 3 things that once the change began to take place,
yeah,
that it was each manager, one manager over this and one manager over that, and then it began to be the whole business.
Yes.
So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that silo approach that they had, that stopped because they now saw that there was more benefit in cooperating, because that gave them what they really need, that met their power needs, or if we take the 5 needs, survival, it meant that the business continued, they had a job, love and belonging, they were connected, they were enjoying each other's company, freedom, they were able to, within the scope of looking after each other and supporting each other, it actually gave them more freedom, fun, they were growing, they were learning, they were enjoying themselves on a daily basis, they wanted to come to work, and finally the power, they were achieving and they were being recognised. They were winning awards for being the most effective and most efficient in so many different industrial areas. It wasn't hard for them, once they started to see those benefits, to realise that cooperating and working together was much better than boss managing and competing against each other within the one enterprise. So that's really, I didn't have to push that, it just became evident really quickly, and it was almost contagious, probably as contagious as the Delta virus of coronavirus, the Delta version. the first 2 leaders took it on. They were coming to work smiling. They were enjoying themselves. They were getting on with each other. And it was a bit like the Harry Met Sally movie scene, the famous scene. I want some of what she's having. That
Exactly.
was really what happened. And I didn't have to push anything. They just wanted it.
Exactly. Once those needs are fulfilled, it becomes contagious. That others
Absolutely.
are wanting. Well, I don't understand it, and it sounds kind of. That's all you're doing is being nice to people, and
Exactly.
but it really works. It really does work.
And this is a real life case. It's over, what are we talking, 15, about 17 years in an industrial setting, as industrial as you'll get anywhere in the world.
But not only were you dealing with so many personalities, but the cultures and how
Exactly.
they had to be brought in and understood and embraced.
Yep.
And
And it was so much fun to see the guys do that, to see them say, well, we can still do a great job no matter who owns this company.
right. Well, America has just celebrated the 4th of July, which is our
Yeah.
independence from Great Britain. And the producers of the film, the movie, Infinite Possibility, which is the life of the quantum physicist David Bohm, but they sent out recommending that, or suggesting or thinking about that, instead of referring to it as Independence Day, to put it Interdependence Day, in order to honor all of the global world that we have within our borders here. And as we can have that in our, then we're beginning to embrace lead management, to
Absolutely.
appreciate each other, and to get along and
Yeah.
understand where someone else is coming from. Well,
I think
thank you.
that's a lovely idea, Mona. I love that. Interdependence Day. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And the integrating all of our various cultures and
Yeah.
beliefs and systems, because they can be coordinated and work together and learn a little bit from each other in the process.
Yes.
And then those managements are more, you're more led instead of driven, which the
Yeah.
boss management is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank all of you for watching with us today, and we're going to go ahead and close out and wish you the good days and good mental health.
Thank you, very Goodbye from Australia.